The Galactic Council's emergency session had been called exactly 17 times in the past 3 millennia. Wars between star systems, the discovery of reality-bending technologies, even the first contact with the hive mind of Kepler 442b. None of these had generated the level of pure, unadulterated panic that now filled the crystalline chambers of the sector's governing body. Ambassador Zektar of the Vorthan Empire stood at the podium. His normally composed demeanor cracked like a damaged hull. His 4 arms trembled as he activated the holographic display, showing grainy footage from a mining colony on the outer rim. The assembled delegates, representing 47 different species from across known space, watched in horrified silence. "What you are about to witness," Zektar began, his translator struggling to convey the raw terror in his voice, "defies everything we thought we knew about warfare, about evolution, about the very nature of predatory behavior itself." The footage began to play. A small mining outpost on Caridian 7. A planet so hostile that only the most desperate criminals and the hardiest colonists dared to settle there. The landscape was a nightmare of crystalline formations that could slice through reinforced armor, toxic geysers that erupted without warning, an atmosphere so corrosive that even sealed environmental suits lasted mere hours. On the screen, a pack of Caridian stalkers emerged from the crystal caves. These weren't ordinary predators. They stood 8 feet tall at the shoulder, possessed natural armor plating that could deflect plasma rounds, and had successfully hunted every species that had ever set foot on their world. Their reputation was so fearsome that hardened criminals would choose execution over exile to Caridian 7. 12 of these apex predators, working in perfect coordination, surrounded what appeared to be a small human outpost. The structures were crude, barely more than prefabricated shelters and mining equipment. By all accounts, it should have been a massacre lasting mere minutes. Then something impossible happened. A small, dark shape emerged from one of the structures. At first glance, it appeared to be some sort of earth creature. Compact, low to the ground, with a distinctive white stripe running down its back. The assembled aliens leaned forward in their seats, confused by what they were seeing. The creature was barely 3 feet long and couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds. Compared to the massive stalkers, it looked like a minor inconvenience, perhaps a pet or livestock that had wandered into the open. One of the stalkers approached, clearly intending to dispatch this trivial obstacle before continuing with the real business of hunting humans. The creature, which the database identified as something called a honey badger, didn't flee. It didn't cower. Instead, it did something that sent shockwaves through every military analyst in the galaxy. It attacked. Not a desperate, suicidal charge born of terror, but a calculated, furious assault that spoke of absolute confidence in its abilities. The honey badger latched onto the stalker's face with claws that seemed impossibly sharp, its teeth finding gaps in armor that plasma weapons couldn't penetrate. The stalker, a creature that had never known fear, let out a sound that was part roar, part scream of panic. It thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge the small earth creature, but the honey badger held on with the tenacity of a magnetic clamp. What happened next defied 3,000 years of xenobiological study. The other 11 stalkers, witnessing their pack leader's distress, didn't immediately join the attack. Instead, they hesitated. These apex predators, who had never retreated from any opponent, showed something that military experts across the galaxy had never recorded in their behavioral profiles: uncertainty. The honey badger finished with the first stalker. The footage was too grainy to show exactly how, and turned its attention to the rest of the pack. Its posture suggested not just readiness to fight, but eager anticipation of the challenge. Then a human voice called out from the settlement, "Badger, come on back, buddy. You're scaring them too much." The honey badger paused, looked back at its human companion who was now visible in the doorway, and made a sound that the translators rendered as chuff of annoyance. With obvious reluctance, it trotted back toward the settlement, leaving 11 stalkers standing in stunned silence around the corpse of their pack leader. But that wasn't the end. As the footage continued, it became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. The timestamp showed this encounter had occurred 6 months ago. Since then, similar reports had been flooding in from across the outer territories. Everywhere humans went, they brought these honey badgers, And everywhere these honey badgers went, the natural order of predator and prey collapsed entirely. The Rigelian death beetles of Proxima Station, creatures so feared that even the mention of their name required a mental health warning for most species, had abandoned their hunting grounds after a single encounter with 3 honey badgers, the shadow raptors of the Veil Nebula, invisible stalkers that had claimed hundreds of alien explorers over the decades, had been recorded fleeing, actually fleeing, from a lone honey badger that couldn't even see them. On New Titan, the infamous storm wolves that hunted in packs of 50 and could bring down armored vehicles had simply left, evacuated an entire continent rather than face a human research station that housed exactly 7 honey badgers. Ambassador Zektar paused the footage and surveyed the assembled delegates. What you've just witnessed is not an anomaly. In the past 6 standard months, we have received over 400 reports of similar incidents. These honey badgers have single-handedly disrupted predator hierarchies on dozens of worlds. A delegate from the Crystalline Collective raised a shimmering appendage. Surely these are exaggerations. No creature that small could pose a significant threat to established apex species. Zektar's expression grew even grimmer. 3 days ago, a single honey badger wandered into a hive queen's nest on Kepler 19c. The entire colony, over 10 million drones, relocated to a different moon rather than confront it. The chamber erupted in panic chatter. Species that had warred for millennia suddenly found themselves united in a single, terrifying realization. Humanity hadn't just brought advanced technology to the galaxy. They had brought evolution's perfect killing machine, wrapped in an unassuming package and apparently kept as a pet. And the most disturbing part? The humans seemed to think this was perfectly normal. The story began 18 months earlier on the agricultural world of New Eden, where Dr. James Harrison was conducting what he believed to be routine xenobiological surveys. Harrison wasn't a warrior or a soldier. He was a mild-mannered scientist from the University of Earth's Comparative Biology Department, sent to catalog the native species of humanity's newest colony world. New Eden had seemed like a perfect assignment for someone of Harrison's temperament. The planet was classified as mostly harmless by the Colonial Survey Bureau, with native life forms that posed minimal threat to human settlement. The indigenous creatures were primarily herbivorous, and the few predators that existed were small, cautious animals that avoided contact with the colonists. Harrison had brought along his research equipment, his comprehensive databases, and, because the assignment was expected to last several years in relative isolation, his companion animal, a honey badger named Buster that he'd rescued from an Earth wildlife preserve. The choice of Buster as a companion had been practical rather than sentimental. Honey badgers were known for their intelligence, their ability to adapt to various environments, and their surprisingly social nature with humans they trusted. The colonial authority had approved the request without question, filing Buster under the category of emotional support animal and noting his compact size as suitable for long-term space travel. What nobody had anticipated, not Harrison, not the colonial authority, certainly not the Galactic Council, was what would happen when Earth's most fearless predator encountered an entirely new ecosystem. The first incident occurred during Harrison's 3rd week on New Eden. He had established a small research station near the edge of the Emerald Valley, a region known for its diverse plant life and peaceful grazing creatures called nibbler herds. These elephant-sized herbivores were docile, slow-moving, and had never shown aggression toward anything larger than a blade of grass. Harrison was documenting soil samples when he heard an unusual commotion from the direction of the nibbler herd. Through his binoculars, he could see the massive creatures running. Actually running, something the locals had insisted was impossible. Away from a small disturbance near the valley's center. He found Buster sitting calmly in the middle of what had moments before been a peaceful grazing area, methodically cleaning his claws while approximately 200 nibbler creatures huddled at the far end of the valley, making distressed honking sounds. "What did you do?" Harrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Buster looked up with the expression of supreme innocence that all pet owners recognize as absolute guilt, made the huffing sound that served as his version of a shrug, and went back to grooming himself. Over the following weeks, similar incidents occurred with increasing frequency. The Emerald Valley's ecosystem began to reorganize itself around a single, undeniable truth. Whatever that small, striped creature was, it was now the apex predator of the region, and every other life form needed to adjust their behavior accordingly. The glimmering birds, New Eden's equivalent of eagles, stopped hunting in the valley entirely. The moss cats, normally fearless nocturnal predators, began avoiding any area where Buster had recently traveled. Even the plant life seemed to react to his presence. The carnivorous snap vines that had posed minor hazards to human colonists simply closed whenever Buster approached, as if playing dead. Harrison documented everything meticulously, partly from scientific curiosity and partly from growing concern. He had studied honey badgers extensively on Earth, but nothing in their behavioral profiles had suggested they would become ecosystem dominating forces when introduced to alien environments. The breakthrough in understanding came when Harrison witnessed Buster's encounter with a creek stalker, New Eden's only significant predator. These wolf-sized creatures were territorial hunters that had occasionally threatened human outposts, though they generally avoided direct confrontation. Harrison watched through his research equipment as a creek stalker approached his camp, clearly drawn by the scent of food supplies. Buster emerged from the shelter and, without hesitation, walked directly toward the predator with the confident gait of an animal that had never encountered anything it couldn't handle. The creek stalker stopped, confused. In its evolutionary experience, small creatures either fled or submitted when confronted by a superior predator. Buster's approach seemed to violate fundamental laws of natural behavior. What followed was less a fight than a demonstration. Buster didn't just defeat the creek stalker. He did so with a casual efficiency that suggested the outcome had never been in doubt. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds, and when it was over, word somehow spread through the creek stalker population with a speed that Harrison found scientifically fascinating and personally terrifying. Within a week, creek stalkers began avoiding the entire region around Harrison's research station. Camera traps showed them taking elaborate detours around the area, sometimes adding hours to their hunting routes rather than risk encountering the strange Earth creature. But the most disturbing discovery came when Harrison reviewed the footage more carefully. The creek stalkers weren't just avoiding Buster's territory, they were communicating about him. The complex series of howls and scent markings that preceded their retreat patterns suggested they had developed specific warnings about the honey badger, terminology that hadn't existed in their species before. Harrison realized he was witnessing evolution in real time. New Eden's predators weren't just learning to avoid honey badgers through individual experience. They were developing cultural adaptations, passing knowledge about these Earth creatures to their offspring and packmates. The implications were staggering. If one honey badger could fundamentally alter the behavioral patterns of an entire planet's ecosystem in a matter of months, what would happen when humans established colonies throughout the galaxy, each bringing their own complement of Earth animals? Harrison sent his preliminary reports to the Colonial Authority with a recommendation for immediate xenobiological review. He suggested that honey badgers might represent an invasive species risk that required careful management and possibly restricted distribution to prevent ecological disruption on other worlds. The Colonial Authority's response was swift and decisive. They ordered 12 more honey badgers for the New Eden Research Station, citing Harrison's success in establishing a predator-free research environment as proof of concept for future colony protection protocols. Harrison read the message 3 times before the full horror of what was about to happen became clear. 6 months after Harrison's initial report disappeared into the Colonial Authority's bureaucratic machinery, the first interstellar incident occurred on the trading station of Nexus Prime. The station served as a neutral meeting ground for dozens of alien species, a carefully maintained environment where different evolutionary paths could coexist without triggering ancient predator-prey responses. Captain Tommy Rodriguez of the merchant vessel Earth's Pride had arrived for a routine trading mission, carrying agricultural samples from New Eden and, in direct violation of several regulations he wasn't aware existed, his ship's mascot, a honey badger named Tank. The Vorthan delegation aboard Nexus Prime represented one of the galaxy's most feared warrior cultures. Their species had evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the strongest survived, and they had carried that evolutionary aggression into space, becoming the galaxy's premier military contractors. Vorthans stood 7 feet tall, possessed natural weapons in the form of retractable claws, and had never encountered a species they couldn't intimidate through sheer physical presence. When Tank wandered into the station's central marketplace, having somehow escaped from the Earth's Pride's cargo bay, the Vorthan warriors initially viewed his appearance as an amusing curiosity. Here was this tiny Earth creature, barely knee-high to even the smallest alien species present, waddling through a space filled with beings that could crush him without effort. Subcommander Grakthor, a Vorthan veteran of 17 different planetary conquests, decided to have some fun with the situation. He approached Tank with the casual confidence of a predator that had never known defeat, intending to demonstrate proper species hierarchy to the assembled traders and diplomats. Tank looked up at the approaching Vorthan warrior, all 7 feet and 400 pounds of battle-hardened muscle and natural weapons, and his response was immediate and unambiguous. He attacked. What happened next became known throughout the galaxy as the 30-second war. Though calling it a war implied that both sides had a chance of victory, Tank latched onto Grakthor's leg with a grip that seemed to ignore the laws of physics, his claws finding purchase on armor that had deflected plasma weapons. Grakthor's roar of surprise echoed through the marketplace as he tried to dislodge the honey badger. But Tank had apparently decided that this particular Vorthan needed to learn some manners, and honey badgers were notoriously committed to their educational programs. The other Vorthan warriors rushed to assist their subcommander, but stopped short when they realized the full scope of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a desperate animal fighting for survival. This was a predator enjoying itself. Tank's body language suggested he viewed 7-foot-tall alien warriors the same way a house cat might view a particularly interesting toy. Within 30 seconds, Subcommander Grakthor, who had personally defeated 43 different alien champions in ritual combat, was making high-pitched sounds of distress and attempting to surrender in 6 different languages. Tank, apparently satisfied that his lesson in proper behavior had been received, released his grip and trotted back toward the Earth's Pride, leaving behind a marketplace full of stunned aliens and one severely traumatized Vorthan warrior who would spend the rest of his career finding excuses to avoid any assignment that might involve humans. The news of the Nexus Prime incident spread through galactic communication networks with the speed of a pandemic. Within days, every major species had received detailed reports of the encounter, complete with security footage that had been analyzed frame by xenobiological experts across known space. The consensus was disturbing. Humans had somehow managed to weaponize a creature that appeared to have no understanding of its own physical limitations, no fear response, and an apparent preference for fighting opponents several times its own size. Admiral Kexvan of the Hegemony Defense Fleet called an emergency meeting of the Outer Rim Security Council. The Hegemony had maintained peace in their sector for over 2 centuries through a careful balance of military strength and diplomatic protocol. The introduction of humans and their honey badgers threatened to destabilize everything they had built. The situation is worse than we initially assessed, Admiral Kexvan announced to the assembled military leaders. We now have confirmed reports from 17 different systems. These honey badgers aren't just defeating individual predators. They're systematically dismantling established territorial hierarchies. The holographic display showed a star map with red zones marking recent incidents. On Rigel 7, a pack of 20 blood hunters, creatures that had terrorized 3 different colonization attempts, had been routed by a single honey badger that had wandered away from a human survey team. The blood hunters had relocated to a different continent rather than risk another encounter. On the mining world of Kepler 186f, the indigenous crystal spiders, arthropods the size of small vehicles that had made mining operations nearly impossible, had simply left. Evacuated their ancestral tunnels after 3 honey badgers had been brought in as part of a human geological survey team. But the most disturbing report came from the diplomatic world of Harmony Station, where a honey badger named Winston had somehow gotten loose during a peace summit between the warring Zephyrian and Centauri factions. Winston had wandered into the middle of a tense negotiation session, apparently drawn by the interesting smells of alien diplomats. Rather than removing the creature, the human ambassador had simply said, "Oh, don't mind Winston. He's friendly," and continued with the proceedings. The effect on the assembled aliens was immediate and profound. Species that had been on the verge of interstellar war suddenly found themselves united by a shared, primal understanding that the small Earth creature in their midst represented a threat greater than any political disagreement. The peace treaty was signed in record time, with both factions eager to conclude their business and evacuate the station before Winston decided they looked interesting enough to investigate more closely. What we're seeing, Admiral Kexvan continued, is the systematic breakdown of evolutionary hierarchies that have been stable for millions of years. These honey badgers don't just defeat other predators. They seem to cause some kind of existential crisis in species that encounter them. Dr. Vexley, the hegemony's chief xenobiologist, activated another display showing behavioral analysis data. Our preliminary studies suggest that honey badgers violate fundamental assumptions that most species make about predator-prey relationships. They're too small to be apex predators, too aggressive to be prey, and too confident to be scavengers. Most alien predators literally don't have a behavioral category for what they're encountering. The situation reached critical mass when the Apex Council, representing the galaxy's 12 most dominant predator species, announced they would take direct action to resolve what they termed the Earth Animal Crisis. These weren't ordinary creatures. The Apex Council members were the evolutionary winners from worlds so hostile that survival required constant combat. The Shadow Lords of Vale Prime, beings that existed partially outside normal spacetime and had never been successfully hunted by any species. The Hive Queens of the Swarming Worlds, whose collective intelligence controlled trillions of warrior drones. The Leviathans of the Deep Void, space-dwelling creatures larger than most starships that fed on the energy of dying stars. If any beings in the galaxy could handle Earth's honey badgers, it would be the Apex Council. Their representative, a being known only as the Void Hunter whose species had never been seen clearly by any creature that survived the encounter, transmitted a message to the human colonial authority. Your creatures have disrupted the natural order. We will restore balance. Surrender your honey badgers for proper containment, or we will take them. The human response was swift and, from the Apex Council's perspective, completely insane. Come and get them. Dr. Sarah Martinez, director of colonial xenobiology, had reviewed all the reports, analyzed all the footage, and reached a conclusion that she was hesitant to share even with her own colleagues. The honey badgers weren't just winning these encounters through superior aggression or unexpected tactics. They were winning because they were the only species in known space that had evolved on a planet where impossible survival scenarios were routine. Earth hadn't just produced honey badgers. It had produced a creature that viewed every challenge as survivable, every opponent as defeatable, and every situation as potentially interesting rather than threatening. Honey badgers weren't fearless because they were stupid. They were fearless because they had evolved on a world where fear was a luxury that got you killed. Meanwhile, on the research station orbiting New Eden, Dr. Harrison received an encrypted message from the Colonial Authority. Emergency Protocol 7 activated. Prepare all available honey badgers for immediate deployment to strategic locations throughout human space. This is not a drill. Harrison stared at the message in growing horror. Protocol 7 was the Colony Defense Protocol, reserved for situations where human settlements faced existential threats. The Colonial Authority was planning to use honey badgers as weapons of war. He looked out at the observation deck where 17 honey badgers were currently napping in the afternoon sun, completely unaware that they had become the center of an interstellar crisis. Buster raised his head, met Harrison's gaze through the window, and made the huffing sound that Harrison had learned meant, "Something interesting is about to happen, isn't it?" The Apex Council's war fleet was already en route to human space, expecting to face some kind of military resistance. What they would find instead was something far more dangerous. Honey badgers who were bored and looking for something to do. The confrontation came at dawn on the contested world of Frontier's Edge, where the Colonial Authority had established their newest settlement in direct defiance of Apex Council territorial claims. The human colony consisted of exactly 43 people, prefabricated shelters, basic mining equipment, and, according to the official manifests, no weapons of any significance. What the manifests didn't mention were the 8 honey badgers that had been, accidentally, included in the colony's livestock shipment. The Apex Council's war fleet arrived like a nightmare given form. The Void Hunter's flagship, Eternal Darkness, emerged from hyperspace with an escort of vessels, representing the galaxy's most feared predator species. Each ship was a masterwork of evolutionary warfare, organic hull plating that could regenerate from damage, weapon systems that fired concentrated terror, and crew members that existed at the apex of their respective food chains. Captain Rodriguez, now serving as the colony's temporary military advisor, watched the alien fleets approach through the settlement's basic sensor equipment. Beside him, Tank sat calmly on the command console, apparently fascinated by the pretty lights on the display screens. "They're hailing us," reported Jenny Wu, the colony's communications specialist. The transmission that came through was less a message than an evolutionary imperative made manifest. The Void Hunter's voice carried harmonics that triggered flight responses in most known species, a sound that spoke directly to the primitive brain structures that govern survival instincts. "Humans of Frontier's Edge, you will surrender your creatures immediately. We have analyzed their capabilities and determined the appropriate containment procedures. Resistance will result in the consumption of your settlement." Captain Rodriguez activated the response channel. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Frontier's Edge colony. We don't have any creatures here except some livestock and pets. Maybe you have us confused with someone else." There was a pause that stretched for several seconds. When the Void Hunter responded, there was something new in its voice. Something that might have been confusion if such beings were capable of that emotion. "You deny the presence of the Earth predators? Our sensors detect 8 distinct biosignatures matching the creatures that have disrupted territorial hierarchies across 17 systems." "Oh, you mean the honey badgers?" Rodriguez's tone was casual, as if discussing the weather. "Yeah, they're around somewhere, probably napping. They're not really creatures, though. They're pets." The silence that followed this exchange would later be studied by xenolinguistics experts as the first recorded instance of an Apex Council member experiencing cognitive dissonance. Tank chose this moment to demonstrate why honey badgers had earned their reputation. He had apparently grown bored with the conversation and decided to investigate the interesting smells coming from outside the settlement. He trotted out of the command center and headed toward the landing zone where the first of the Apex Council's shuttles was touching down. The shuttle's occupants were shadow stalkers from Vale Prime, beings that existed partially in normal space and partially in the quantum foam that underlaid reality. They were essentially living nightmares, creatures that had evolved to hunt by manipulating their victims' fear responses until paralysis set in. Tank approached the landing shuttle with the casual interest of a tourist checking out local attractions. The shadow stalkers emerged from their craft in a formation designed to maximize psychological impact, flowing like liquid darkness, their forms shifting between dimensions in ways that caused most observers to question their own sanity. Tank sat down about 10 feet away from the aliens and tilted his head with the expression of polite attention that honey badgers used when encountering something new and potentially interesting. The shadow stalkers attempted to deploy their fear-inducing abilities, projecting waves of existential terror that could reduce most sentient beings to catatonic states. The quantum shadows they cast began to writhe and pulse with malevolent energy, while subsonic harmonics filled the air with the sound of approaching doom. Tank's response was to make the huffing sound that Harrison had learned meant "neat trick," and approach the lead shadow stalker with obvious enthusiasm. What happened next became known as the Vale Prime incident, and would be required study material in xenobiology courses for centuries. Tank, apparently deciding that beings who could shift between dimensions might be fun to play with, launched himself at the lead shadow stalker with the joyful enthusiasm of a dog greeting its favorite human. The collision between honey badger and interdimensional predator created effects that the colony's sensors couldn't properly measure. Tank seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple quantum states, his claws somehow finding purchase on creatures that were only partially present in normal reality. The shadow stalkers, who had never encountered anything that could touch them while they were phase-shifted, began making sounds that their translators couldn't render into any known language. Within minutes, the entire squad of shadow stalkers had retreated to their shuttle, which departed for orbit with what could only be described as unseemly haste. Tank returned to the colony perimeter and began grooming himself with the satisfied air of someone who had just enjoyed an interesting workout. The effect on the watching Apex Council fleet was immediate and decisive. Ship after ship began withdrawing from orbit, their captains reporting various urgent matters that required their immediate attention elsewhere in the galaxy. The Void Hunter's final transmission came 12 hours later, after the last of the Apex Council vessels had departed the system. The Earth creatures are classified as a restricted phenomenon. The Apex Council withdraws all territorial claims in human space. We suggest extreme caution in any future encounters. Captain Rodriguez watched the alien fleet disappear into hyperspace and turned to Tank, who was now napping peacefully in a patch of sunlight. "You know, buddy," he said quietly, "I don't think they're going to bother us anymore." Tank opened one eye, made the huffing sound that meant obviously, and went back to sleep. In the aftermath of what historians would later call the Great Honey Badger Revelation, the galaxy began to adapt to a new reality. The Galactic Council established the Earth Animal Accords, a complex set of treaties that essentially gave humans free rein to colonize wherever they chose, provided they kept their honey badgers well-fed and reasonably content. Dr. Harrison, now elevated to the newly created position of Chief Xenobiological Warfare Specialist, a title he tried unsuccessfully to refuse, published his definitive study on the ecological impact of Earth animals in alien environments. His conclusion was both simple and terrifying. Humans hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior technology or military might. They had done it by bringing along the most evolutionarily stubborn creatures in known space. The honey badgers, for their part, seemed blissfully unaware of their role in reshaping interstellar relations. They continued to approach each new world and each new species with the same combination of fearless curiosity and casual confidence that had made them legendary on Earth. Whether facing interdimensional horrors or crystalline predators, their attitude remained consistent. Everything was interesting, nothing was impossible, and most problems could be solved through sufficient application of claws and determination. Captain Rodriguez retired from active service and opened the galaxy's first Earth Animal Experience Center on New Terra, where alien tourists could observe honey badgers, guinea pigs, and other Earth creatures in carefully controlled environments. The center's most popular attraction was feeding time, during which visitors could watch Tank and his fellow honey badgers approach their meals with the same methodical enthusiasm they had once applied to dismantling galactic hierarchies. The Apex Council, meanwhile, had retreated to the far reaches of known space and established a new policy regarding human settlements: complete avoidance. Their official statement read, "Humans have achieved evolutionary perfection through the development of creatures that recognize no limitations. Further study is inadvisable." But the story of humanity's expansion didn't end with honey badgers. As colonial ships spread throughout the galaxy, they brought with them a menagerie of Earth creatures, each adapted to thrive in conditions that other species found impossible. On the ice world of Kepler 438b, where temperatures could freeze most life forms solid in minutes, human colonists established thriving settlements with the help of creatures called Arctic foxes, whose ability to survive in extreme cold left native ice predators baffled and defeated. In the crushing gravity wells of the super-Earth colonies, humans arrived with animals called tardigrades, microscopic creatures that could survive in the vacuum of space, withstand radiation levels that would kill most complex life forms, and apparently view the concept of impossible conditions as a personal challenge. Each new world brought new encounters between Earth's evolutionary success stories and alien species that had never faced anything quite so unreasonably determined to survive and thrive. The galaxy was learning what Earth had known for millions of years. When evolution gets creative, the results can be stranger and more wonderful than anyone expects. And sometimes the smallest creatures cast the longest shadows. Want to see what happens when humanity introduces Earth's ocean predators to aquatic alien worlds? Our next story explores how a simple great white shark became the terror of 3 different star systems, and why the underwater cities of Aquatica Prime still won't go swimming after dark.